Hey guys, this is something different. Growing up, my family was never the first to get a new console. So what would happen is I'd end up playing a lot of stuff that got released towards the end of one console's life cycle that never really found an audience. I hope you like this. Subscribe. Tell me if you want to see another video game get this kind of treatment. I have some ideas, but I'm pretty happy with this one if this is the only one we ever do. A lost gem of its time, released in 1995 at the end of the Sega Genesis era, a platformer that was sluggish compared to Sonic was released. The plucky anthropomorphic star with stretchy arms would find its way from the shelf at the local Video Galaxy and into my Sega Genesis for the weekend. But let's go back. I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. Sega. Further back, please. In the 1940s, Irvin Bromberg and his son Martin saw World War II as an opportunity to provide soldiers with some leisure activities. Okay, they made slot machines. And because they were a company that primarily made games for service members, they decided to call the company Service Games. And they built their business in Hawaii. And after the war, they decided it was best to move their business to Japan. The decision to move their business to Japan probably had a lot to do with the US banning slot machines. A lot happens over the next 10 years, and it's not exactly easy to decipher all of it because we don't seem to have all the records, but the bullet points are, despite being kicked out of the military bases in US territories, Service Games continues to grow. The US and Japan start investigating the company for a group of things including bribery and tax evasion charges, which the company beats, and then dissolves, where it's picked up by two new companies that are seemingly owned by the same groups of people and continue business as usual. Oh, and sometime during all of this, they start using a shorthand name for the company. Sega. Okay, we're not quite there yet, but let's get back to Ristar. Ristar fared decently in reviews in 1995. The puzzles, art, and unique gameplay were all praised. In fact, one of the biggest knocks on this game at the time was its difficulty. I think that was one of the things that made this game so enjoyable for me as a kid. Video games at the time were kind of notorious for being really difficult. Early games had memory limitations where the games couldn't be super long like the ones we have now. The ability to save your progress and restart, things like that, just wasn't feasible at the time. So in order to increase the playtime in a shorter game, developers would make the game difficult. Even though games up to this point were starting to be made for consoles and at-home play, the people developing them had spent most of their time making games for arcades, which meant they had this mindset that games needed to be hard enough where players couldn't get through them without putting more quarters into them, but also fun enough where people didn't get frustrated and stop playing. In this way, Ristar is a little more modern to me, in that it never felt like a chore or a slog to get through, but at the time, this was seen as a game for more beginner gamers. And while the art style was praised for pushing 16-bit graphics to the limit, you could be forgiven for thinking this game looks a lot like Sonic, but slow, and with much stretchier arms. Sega. Now we're getting somewhere. The early 1990s, Sega was in a much different place. The company had gone from slot machines to arcade machines to home consoles. Their first console, the Sega Mega Drive, had sold decently, but nowhere near the success of their rival in the industry. Nintendo dominated the 80s console wars, largely on the back of one plumber. Super Mario Bros. 3 alone sold 18 million copies, and the top brass at Sega took notice. And we can't talk about the big battles in 90s gaming without talking about the boss battles in Ristar. Each of the 7 world stages in Ristar culminates in a boss battle that feels so unique to its individual stage. The stretchy arms mechanic that the game employs feels much less gimmick after you see the mileage that the developers get out of it. It never feels dull and is constantly reinventing itself in game. Okay, so there's a couple of stories about what happens next. They're all a little different, but I've tried to bridge them and make them complete since they have a lot of common elements to them. Sega's top brass gathers all of their best people and say, if we're going to make a splash in the American market, we need a mascot to rival Mario, and a good one. And they come up with a lot of ideas, but as you may have guessed, the top idea is this rabbit with stretchy ears. It's kid-friendly, easy to draw, there's just one problem. Sega's developed some new tech and they're looking for a character that can go fast and roll around incredibly quickly. So they retool and the rabbit with stretchy ears gradually gets replaced. Sonic the Hedgehog is born. The Sega Genesis, with its better price point and Sonic, will begin to dominate Nintendo over the next 3 years. By 1994, 3 more Sonic games had released, and the man in charge of bringing Sonic to life, Yuji Naka, was attempting to move on to other projects. Sega began looking for alternatives to their blue mascot, who had helped them grab 65% of the market share against Nintendo, and Akira Nishino was one of the lead developers on this new project. Sega had demanded another cartoon project, and while trying to find a unique gameplay mechanic to build their game around, they came back to the rabbit who could grab items with its ears. The first prototype for the game Feel was demoed in 1994, and the rabbit got scrapped for something which I can only describe as the combination of rabbit and star. Yuji Uekawa, an artist working on their first major project, is widely credited for shaping this character into Ristar. In 1995, the Sega Genesis was on its last legs. Almost all Genesis games released that year had their sales impacted by the imminent release of Sega's new console, the Sega Saturn. Ristar was released only 3 months before the Saturn launched, and the innovative platformer never found a true audience. However, with its unique gameplay and style, the game was truly a forgotten classic.